In this video, I'm going to show you my go-to recipe for painting steel. Hello everyone, and welcome to another Brushstroke painting guide. I'm Brushstroke, and as you heard from the intro, this video is going to be a recipe for how to paint steel. Now, steel is one of those colours which you're going to use a lot when you're doing miniature painting. Pretty much every model will have some sort of silver or steel detail on it, ranging from the smallest things like a belt buckle through to full medieval armour, sci-fi bolters, swords, knives, pistons, wires, gauges, gears, you name it. There's always something on a model which is going to need to be painted in the steel colour, which is why it's so great to have a recipe which is really quick and easy to do but gives great results. Now for this video I'm going to use a Necron model just as an example model to paint it on because it's predominantly metal based, but like I say, you can use this recipe on anything that you want to be steel, silver, etc. Now before we begin, I think there's a few things I should mention which will help you get the most out of this video, starting off with thinning your paints. So this recipe relies quite heavily on getting that nice clean smooth finish. So if you'd like to know more about how I thin my paints and how thin is thin, then you might want to check out the paint thinning video I did by clicking the link above. I also get asked a lot about the paintbrushes I use. Now, thanks to the awesome guys at Artis Opus, I now actually have a paintbrush set, which has brushes in it which are specifically picked to match the brushes that I use in all of my paint guides. So if you'd like more details on that, then please do click this link above. And then finally, this video recipe does rely heavily on some edge highlighting. So if you'd like some tips and tricks on how to improve your edge highlighting, then please do click that link above or check out all the links in the description below. Okay then, so let's make a start on some painting, and as I mentioned, I'm going to be painting a Necron for this example, just because it's a big metal object, but this recipe can be used on any metal item that you like. And the first thing you're going to notice is I've already primed my miniature piece, and for this I've just used some Vallejo surface primer in black, and then I've added a light grey zenithal highlight from about 45 degrees above just to pick out those details on camera. Now this zenithal highlight is not necessary for this recipe, it's just something that I do for my videos. So if you prefer, you could just do an all over prime of a medium grey or black and the recipe would still work fine. Because the first step is going to be applying an all over base coat colour, and for this I'm going to use some graphite from Dark Star Miniatures. So really simple step just to start off with. I've thinned the paint with a little bit of water on my palette, and the aim of this step is to get a nice clean and smooth coverage across all of the surface. Because I've thinned it down, it does make it a little bit more transparent, so I will need to apply several coats in order to build up to a solid finish. Now, if you're not familiar with Dark Star Miniatures or their Molten Metallics range, then I do recommend that you check them out. The reason why this particular paint is my go-to recipe for steel, and the one that I use pretty much on every model, is because of this paint. This graphite is by far the best medium silver gunmetal colour that I've found. It's absolutely fantastic. The flecks in it are so super fine, and it goes on so cleanly and smoothly. It's just a joy to paint with. Now for this step, I'm not being particularly neat, but I am being concerned about making sure the paint goes on cleanly and smoothly. It's particularly important when you're painting with metallic paints that you do this, because it's far better to apply multiple thin layers and make sure that those metallic flecks in the paint are evenly distributed across the whole of the surface, than to try and rush it and apply it too thickly, and you'll get heavy concentrations of those metallic flecks and the paint will just all clump up and look really ugly. So do take your time. Make sure the paint is thinned on your palette and apply it as multiple layers to build up to a solid finish. Now in this particular case, it only took a couple of layers. Now if you do have the luxury of having an airbrush, then I would highly recommend that you do this step with your airbrush. Again, I'd apply it as several thin layers just to make sure you get that even coverage of the metallic fleck across the whole of the surface, and you build up to that rich solid finish. Now, whichever method you use, when you finish, you should have something that looks a little bit like this. Nice and shiny and super smooth and ready for that next step. And it's at this point I'm going to paint in all the other colours on the model, so I'm going to do that now, which means we can move on to the next stage, which is going to be applying a wash to all of the steel details, and for this I'm going to use some Agrax Earthshade from Games Workshop. So another nice and simple step to follow on with then, I'm going to use this neat straight from the bottle. I'm going to step up to a large brush so I can get this done nice and quickly. Now that's not to mean that I can just throw this on and let it flood the model. Actually what I'm going to do is try and add it a little bit more methodically and encourage it to settle into all those recesses and all those grooves, fill in that detail and really add that shadow. But on any of the flatter areas I'm going to encourage it away from the center and push it towards the edges to try and get a nice smooth transition on all these curves and shapes. Now obviously in this example I'm using Agrax Earthshade, which is a brown wash, and that will give an end result which is a bit more of a sort of dirty tarnished steel. But you could also use different colours at this stage. So for example, a black wash like Null Oil would give you a classic clean steel look. Or you can even go a bit more creative and you could use something like a Seraphim Sepia, and that would give more of a warm copperish kind of finish. So do feel free to have a bit of fun with this step and play around some different colours and see what other results you can come up with. And the only other thing to remember when using a wash is that it will take a little bit longer to dry, so do make sure it is fully dry before moving on to the next stage. And now with that wash fully dry, the steel is already looking really good. It's got that sort of tarnished and weathered look, and more than good enough for a tabletop finish. But if you do want to move on and push it to that next level, then the next step is going to be adding a highlight layer, and for this I'm going to use graphite from Darkstar Miniatures. So the aim of this step really is to add that little bit more volume and definition to the metal. So what I'm doing is I'm painting in all of the raised areas and I'm making those a lot lighter, and I'm leaving untouched any areas which would be in shadow or in the recesses and in the gaps. And what this does, like I say, is it just adds that little bit more volume to the metal and gives it a bit more shape. So what I've done is I've thinned my graphite down on my palette with that little bit of water so it's flowing really cleanly and smoothly. And I'm actually just going to apply a single layer to this. It's all about adding that little bit more shine and highlight to the areas which would catch the most light. And then on the underside of things and in the recesses, I'm just going to leave that shade wash untouched. So for example, on the forearm here, it obviously curves round, so I'm going to paint the top area which we're catching the light, but then just paint it down to the sides to the point where it starts to curve back in and it would go back into shadow, and I'm going to leave that untouched. And then it's just a case of working your way around the model, painting in those higher surfaces and leaving our shade wash on the underside and in all the recesses. Okay, so with that highlight layer now added, the steel is really starting to pop. And there's only one final stage now left to add, and that's going to be an edge highlights to all of the steel, and for this I'm going to use some chrome from Vallejo. Absolutely fantastic paint this. If you've never used it before, I highly recommend that you get some of this right away. It's fantastic for edge highlighting any metals at all. You use it straight from the pot, so no need to thin, and it is almost like liquid metal. It's absolutely fantastic. In fact, it's so bright under my lights, even the camera's not really picking it up. But what you want to do for this stage is work your way around all the steel areas, picking out those sharp edges with your edge of your brush to give it that extra definition and highlight. So depending on the model you're painting, this could be quite a time-consuming step, but it is worth doing well and it is worth doing neatly, so do take your time and try not to rush. As always, if you do make any mistakes, don't panic, just let it dry and you always go back and neaten things back up again with some graphite later. So like I say, it's just a case of slowly working your way around all of the model and picking out all of those edges. And after a while, I actually find it gets quite relaxing. You sort of get into a bit of a rhythm and you can hit those edges with that sweet part of the brush just on the tip. But like I said at the start of this video, if you do want some hints and tips in terms of how I improved my edge highlighting, then please do check out this video above because I think it will help you a lot. Okay, so when you do finish painting in these edge highlights, that's going to be the steel recipe complete, and I'll just finish off the rest of the model just so I can show you that end result. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you found it useful, and of course a massive thank you to my channel members whose names are going across the screen now. Your support for the channel is very much appreciated. If you did enjoy this video, then please do hit that like button and drop a comment below. If you'd like to see more of these recipe videos, then please let me know in the comments below what you'd like to see. Also, don't forget to check out the description below where I'm going to list all of the paints that I've used for this recipe and where you can get those at discount prices, so it's definitely worth checking out. And you'll also find all the links to the videos I mentioned earlier too. If you have enjoyed this video, then please do hit that subscribe button and don't forget to click the notification bell to be told whenever I post another video. Speaking of other videos, I'd love it if you stayed on the channel, so why not stay and check out another recipe video, or perhaps one of my other painting videos where you can see these recipes in action.